welcome you once again to this program on climate action and sustainability for us. In short, CAS, again without the H, for you. And this is brought to you by the Climate Action. Let me make that bigger. Climate Action and Sustainability Alliance, or CASA, with our first social enterprise, which is the vehicle that we are using in our journey to a rich, sustainable development. Our social enterprise on education and communication. This month is a very important month for us because we are celebrating two of our important natural assets, bamboo and our marine biodiversity. We have about 20 native bamboo in the Philippines out of about 60 to 80 species. There are about, I think, 1,500 species worldwide. But since we have at least 20 of them that have been with us since, I guess, time immemorial, we consider that as part of our natural capital. And the other one, which I consider to be the most important blessing of God to us, is our marine biodiversity. We are the host of the Center of Marine Biodiversity in the world. Okay, we have two images here. The bamboo, I took this at the Bamboo Setum of the Ecosystem Research and Development Bureau, ERDB, of the DNR at the foot of Mount Makiling. And the other one is something that I really love, but whose photographer I have not even met. I got this from Unsplash taken by Mr. Ralph Slegel. I hope I pronounced that properly. Thank you very much, Mr. Ralph, for your beautiful photo, which I'm using not only on this initial page, but also as a border for some of my slides. Okay, so September is both our Manamo, Maritime and Archipelagic Nation Awareness Month, because many of our co-Filipinos are not aware that as a country, we are a man. So we had to have this declared by the president as Manamo. I still have a bad voice because I have not been speaking because of this lockdown. And then this is also our Bamboo Month, because today this is September 18 when I'm taping this. This is World Bamboo Day, and I guess the reason why we declared it by the House of Representatives as the Bamboo Month is so we can join the worldwide celebration on this day and around this day in other parts of the world, celebration of bamboo. So I wrote this article celebrating our, let me make that bigger, celebrating our natural assets with positive actions. We always want to have positive actions. In our column, Mapping the Future of the Management Association of the Philippines in the Philippine Daily Inquirer, one of our top broadsheets. This was last Monday, September 13, 2021, but that is available still and will be so for some time online in Inquirer Opinion. Just Google my name. So happy Manamo and Bamboo Month to everyone. What does our climate action and sustainability channel want to do? It aims to share information on climate change and sustainability, for example, the factors affecting them that are within our control, of course, including those that are not within our control, but we have to focus on those that we can act on. Those are within our control. Motivate all to think hard and well, talk about the issues and concerns, collaborate together, and act positively now on climate change and sustainable development goals, and recognize and feature best practices. So we hope that we will have a contest on this, especially for students who are watching us, for you to start already documenting best practices or initiating, even if there are no best practices yet, in your local communities, and for corporations to also initiate then document your best practices on climate action and sustainability. Okay, I am your host for this and other succeeding episodes. Just call me Cora. I'm convener chair of CASA, and you may read this during your free time. Okay, so what this second episode on ENCA will cover? First is we will learn the actions being taken by our National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA, on ENCA, on ecosystem and natural capital accounting and related matters. They have been acting on the guidelines issued by the United Nations, that is the SIA, ENCA System, which is also covered by the PENCAS bill, that we will follow that which the UN has asked UN countries to implement. Then we will hear some highlights of the PENCAS bill, and then understand the role of ecosystems and natural capital in enhancing our ability to be resilient to adverse climate change. And this is more a bonus because this is also fun, how far the effect is of our behavior, and that's bad behavior, I tell you, on our water bodies. So we have, again, our climate action and sustainability for us program is presenting to you now our second episode, which is part of our ebook on ecosystem and natural capital accounting, or ENCA. Our first presenter is Undersecretary of the National Economic and Development Authority, Dr. Mercedita A. Sombilla, who was also very actively assisting then NEDA Director General RC Balisacan in our Philippine Council for Sustainable Development, that I don't know why it has not met for quite some time. Reminder. Okay, so her expertise covers regional development, particularly agricultural development, policy analysis and formulation, environment and natural resources management, climate change adaptation, and mitigation. And you can see here her advocacy: sustainable and resilient rural economy, improvement of rural household income and welfare, food security improvement, natural resource management, disaster and risk reduction and management. She got her PhD in agricultural and applied economics from the University of Minnesota, her MA in economics and BS mathematics from UP Diliman. Her work experience has covered policy research and analysis, development planning, and program project development and evaluation, covering the Philippines, the United States of America, ASEAN region, and Bangladesh. She has held many other positions in different organizations like Secretary General of the Association of Southeast Asian Agricultural Economists, political focal point of the Global Environment Facility or GEF for the Philippines, and the Philippines co-focal for the Nationally Determined Contribution Partnership or NDCP. Friends, Dr. Mercy Sombilla.
Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the Philippine economy grew at an average of more than 6% from 2012 to 2019. This economic growth is measured using the traditional gross domestic product or GDP, which reflects the market value of final goods and services produced in a country in a given period. However, this is an incomplete assessment of the country's economic well being as it does not take into account the stocks and flow of natural assets, such as forests, wetlands, and other critical ecosystems that serve as inputs to the said final goods and services. It also does not cover the degradation of said natural assets and negative externalities of economic activities. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a strong reminder for us to put more attention to the importance of our environment and natural resources in building a resilient and sustainable economy. Inadvertently, humans forget that our nature continuously provides the needed ecosystem services that benefit long term income and growth and sustain a well functioning economy. Because of this negligence, we fail to effectively address important policy questions such as which ecosystems generate which ecosystem services, to what extent do ecosystem services contribute to economic and other human activities, which ecosystems are still in best condition and which are the most degraded, and how have these ecosystems changed and have been the impact on the generation of their services. A tool that could answer such policy questions and better link nature to prosperity and security of people and economy is the National Capital Accounting or NCA. NCA measures the stocks of natural resources and the flows of benefits or services they provide. Such contributions, when integrated into the country's system of national accounts, can determine if the country is on path of sustainable growth and if such growth is benefiting the society at large. It is a powerful tool for policy and business decision making. NCA is not new in the country. In fact, the Philippines can be considered one of the pioneers of NCA in Southeast Asia. Past major NCA initiatives started under the Environmental and Natural Resources Project or ENRUP, the Philippine Economic, Environmental, and Natural Resources Accounting Project or PINRA from the 1990s to the early 2000s. In 2014, the Philippines piloted ecosystems accounting through the Philippines Wealth Accounting and Valuation System Ecosystem Services or the PhilWaves project, which was supported by the World Bank. The project, which was led by the National Economic and Development Authority, aimed at developing adjusted macroeconomic indicators, national accounts on minerals and mangroves, and ecosystem accounts for the Southern Palawan and Laguna de Bay. One of the applications of the PhilWaves output is the development of a local government unit or LGU scorecard based on the ecosystem accounts. The LGU scorecard for Laguna de Bay is now used by the Laguna Lake Development Authority in assessing the environmental conditions of the municipalities and cities within the Laguna de Bay Basin, identifying hotspots for rehabilitation, and recognizing or providing non-cash incentives to the LGUs that demonstrate good resource management. The PhilWaves project also prompted the crafting of the roadmap to institutionalize NCA in the Philippines, which lay out the critical components, policy use, and institutional arrangement to implement NCA in the country. The importance of NCA and the need to upscale it is emphasized among the priority strategies under the Environment and Natural Resources chapter of the updated 2017-2022 Philippine Development Plan and the Philippine Action Plan for Sustainable Consumption and Production, or the PAP4SCP. To achieve this, there is a need to pursue and put in place a more systematic collection, monitoring, and reporting of ENR data and information. This data and information are critical to capture the true value and benefits of our natural capital, which then can help assess the appropriateness of development projects proposed, especially in areas with high conservation values. This ebook is indeed timely and important reference document, and we commend the authors and all the experts behind its publication, which intends to raise greater awareness and appreciation of NCA. The information being put together in this ebook will help improve public understanding of the basic concepts, metrics, and sample of cases of generating important data and information on the stock and status of the country's resources and ecosystems. Further, we believe that this initiative will contribute in advancing the scientific and policy agenda on NCA in the country and in creating a much broader platform for knowledge and learning exchanges among government implementing agencies, policymakers, scientists, practitioners, and advocates. On behalf of the National Economic and Development Authority, I would like to express our appreciation to the Climate Crisis and Sustainable Development Network, or CCSDN Philippines, for their continuing advocacy to NCA through their communication programs. Together, let us make nature count and capitalize partnership for the future.
Thank you very much, USec Sombilla, for your presentation. We now welcome you back to our program, Climate Action and Sustainability for Us, for our next presenter. This, again, is brought to you by our CASA, Climate Action and Sustainability Alliance, and our first social enterprise on education and communication. Our presenter is co-chair of our Recovering with Nature group in our CASA. Her expertise covers environmental law, protected areas, water and biodiversity, conservation policy, and public health law. Her current interests cover land laws, forestry, civil society mobilization, natural capital accounting, of course, seeking local consensus among various stakeholders on ecosystem management. She received her law degree from the University of the Philippines in 1990, and her work experience currently, she is serving as Director 2 at the DENR, but detailed to the Office of Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda. Previously, she served as Undersecretary of the DENR from 2016 to 2018. She has written several papers, and one sample is Impact Assessment of the National Greening Program of the DENR, the institutional component for the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. Several of our members in CASA have been awarded the the Outstanding Women in the Nation Service Award. But I think our speaker, Attorney Ipat Luna, is the only one who has received the TOIM Award, the Outstanding Young Men Award in 2004. We in towns joke about this whenever we hear about a woman accepting or being recognized as an awardee of the TOIM Award. I think they ran out of outstanding men to receive it. That's what we say. Sorry. Okay, I now present to you Attorney Ipat Luna.
Good day, everyone, and thank you for including me in this great initiative of an e-book on the Philippine Ecosystem and Natural Capital Accounting Law of 2021. This is HB 9181, filed by Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda. My name is Ipat Luna, and I work as a consultant from the DNR to the Office of Deputy Speaker Legarda. First, I'd like to honor the memory of Datu Dungkoan Rio Besto, one of the first indigenous people to honor and engage in a system of ecological services scheme in order to fund the reforestation of their ancestral domain. Datu Rio Besto was the tribal chieftain of Milalitra from Mount Kalatungan in Bukidnon, and he was open-minded and forward-looking enough to ensure that their reforestation efforts, which were a success even then, before the system of ecological services was put in place, to continue. As a quick view, we will look at the background of this effort, on why there should be a PENCAS law, on the provisions of 9181, HB 9181, on the provisions specifically on rights of nature and the EIA, on what to expect to happen when this bill passes, and on what would be the impacts on how we measure economic success. To begin on the background, in 2019, Sir Partha Dasgupta was commissioned by the UK Treasury to craft a document on biodiversity and economics. He released a preliminary report in 2020 and a final report in 2021, both of which are eye-opening for many people, especially those in the economic sector, but have been what we've been talking about in the environmental sector for a long time, specifically Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda, who in 2007, as early as that, already filed a bill on an Ecosystem and Environment and Natural Accounting System Act, then called PINRA. She instructed us to draft a new bill that incorporates a lot of the ideas from Sir Partha Dasgupta as well as from the other experts that was convened by the Management Association of the Philippines and the Sustainable Development Committee, chaired by Dr. Corazon Claudio. This working group of experts was convened to work on a bill that would integrate natural capital in the indicators of economic health of our country. First off, why PENCAS? Many will already say this, because we cannot manage what we cannot measure, because all livelihood, business, health, and life depend on nature. And if we don't have this kind of accounting, we are sadly missing a great deal of our capital assets. Our societies have been operating at a substantial deficit since the Industrial Revolution, and we have to correct this deficit. Sir Partha calls it an asset management portfolio problem. We have done our accounting, our economic health indicators at the peril of current and future generations, because our institutions and processes assume that these natural capital assets are infinite and depleting them come without a cost. In other words, we have assumed them to be free. Our human ecological security depends on changing these institutions and practices and on measuring how well we preserve natural capital as an asset economically by ensuring that we do not operate anymore at a deficit, by shifting our measures of economic success towards more sustainable economic pursuits, and by changing our financial and educational systems to allow for polycentric, collaborative planning, participation, and coordination. The provisions of HB 9181 include the concept of natural capital as the valuation of goods and services provided by nature, previously thought of as free. The bill puts in place mechanisms and institutions to measure this capital and use it in planning and governance. There is the creation of the Presidential Commission on Natural Capital Accounting, as well as units in all the government agencies that are relevant, in order that natural capital will be measured in all sectors. This is particularly not only a DNR issue. It has provisions on planning and EIA, education, data, and research support. It also has a provision on the rights of nature. Valuation need not commodify nature's goods and services. We are not putting a peso value on these goods and services in order to sell them or give them up for a pecuniary value. We can still consider the inherent rights of nature despite quantifying its value only for the purposes of better decision making. This is why it is also very critical to look at our EIA process as we look at PENCAS. Because even as early as the 70s, Section 4 of PD 1151 already counts among what we have to include in our impact statements and impact assessments under Section 4C, alternatives to the proposed actions. Previously, these alternatives have been assumed to be economic alternatives, and therefore the cheapest ones are always the ones selected as the preferred alternative. But if we look at this process as an environmental impact statement system, then we have to account for natural capital. We have to account for ensuring that ecosystem goods and services are really considered in generating the alternatives to the proposed action. Along with that, letter C, letter D and E of Section 4 of that law, as early as the 1970s, requires the inclusion in the EIA and the EIS a determination that the short-term uses of the resources of the environment are consistent with the maintenance and enhancement of the long-term productivity of the same. No? Letter E says that whenever the proposal involves the use of depletable or non-renewable resources, a finding must be made that such use and commitment are warranted. We have to look at the process, the EIA process within the project cycle as reflected in the EIA manual, to see that as stated in that manual, it would seem that a project is already selected before we generate the alternatives. And this is not the intent of PD 1151 because the statement has to include the alternatives as part of the impact statement. In fact, in 2000, as early as 2001, a study by Steinman in the Environmental Impact Assessment Review says that incorporating alternatives earlier in the EIA process, in the agency planning process, is critical. That we have to make environmental factors explicit criteria for screening alternatives for the final set. We should not eliminate alternatives in the mandate of that are not in the mandate of the agency proposing, or we should not eliminate the no-go alternative as well in the analysis. That alternatives should better reflect societal goals, not just narrow agency goals, and not just project goals. We should change the sequence, Steinman said, that agencies should explore more environmentally sound approaches before proposing an action or a project. Agencies should construct a purpose and need statement that would not summarily exclude less damaging alternatives, nor unduly favor the proposed action, which is, as I said, usually the least cost action. In other words, proper development of alternatives will allow consideration of ecosystem services or damage estimation and not merely economic considerations in selecting a preferred alternative. And we would have a very much better EIA system if we do so. As an example, the types of alternatives in the EIA of South Africa, according to their criteria for determining alternatives in EIA, include an activity alternative, which, as an example, would show whether a train or a plane or a road will be the better alternative to get from point A to point B. A location alternative, what will be the alignment, for example, of a road, or where is it best to put a factory? Process alternatives, is this the best way to do it, or should we find another way, for example, to look at reuse of water instead of looking at virgin water as an alternative? The demand alternatives, can we manage the demand better? Scheduling alternatives, is it best now or in 3 years when we have better technology? Input alternatives, are these the best inputs to the process? Routing alternatives, site layout alternatives. As an example, Wetlands International is looking at a better site layout alternative for the Bulacan Airport that will reduce its impact on the waterbird migration and habitats. Scale alternatives and design alternatives. All of these 10 types of alternatives are really not that present in the current environmental impact statements that are submitted to the EMB. In other words, as stated again, we can only select a preferred alternative that is both environmentally and economically preferred if we look at the ecosystem services and the natural capital that we are losing in the process. And we do not really do this well enough in the current EIA system. Hence, putting EIA as a provision in the PENCAS bill is critical. And the inclusion of these considerations in EIAs and environmental impact statements going forward will be a better way to use the EIA system as a planning mechanism rather than what it is currently. So what do we expect to happen when this bill passes? Again, a change in the way that we do the EIA, because we will already be looking at economic values of what natural capital or ecosystem services we might lose in the process of going forward with a project, and in fact, possibly to look at these alternatives ahead of the selection of the preferred alternative or the project that will already be done. We expect that the units of PENCAS in each agency will start generating data on the valuation of natural capital. They themselves, not just the DNR, but all the units of PENCAS in the bill, will start generating data on what we might be sacrificing when we go ahead with a certain alternative. They will start to generate data on what will be the cost of these economically in future in terms of their productivity, in terms of what ecosystem services and the quantification of these ecosystem services in future will have in the analysis of how we intend to go about our economic progress. Government planning in all levels and the EIA can already use the data. Processes and mechanisms for data gathering will improve and be more efficient and integrated. For the aspects where data is not yet generated, because we cannot expect all the data to be generated upon the passing of this bill, we can encourage universities to make data generation and analysis of natural capital accounting as part of their courses, and students can then generate the data. The idea is that the entire country will start to generate natural capital data, ecosystem services, values, in order for us to make proper decisions at all levels, including the local government. By the way, there are very clear provisions on the local government contributions in the natural capital accounting, because they can very well do it themselves already as we speak. What would be the impacts on how we measure economic success once this bill is passed? When we generate the data that this bill requires, we will be able to assess economic health with the full consideration of all nature's values, goods, and services. we will be able to look at the natural capital as our assets, and we will then not have to have an asset portfolio management problem. We need not have a deficit if we consider the values that we might be sacrificing if we have a valuation for our natural capital. Again, no ecology, no economy. No ecology, no economy, no society. We cannot be going forward with a pandemic recovery without incorporating natural capital and economic in our economic accounting. We cannot go forward without looking at the ecological services and making sure that decisions value those ecological services in accounting for what we should do in future. So a pandemic recovery and a climate change averting economic direction must consider natural capital and ecosystem services. Thank you very much. I hope that was enlightening.
Thank you very much, Attorney Ipat Luna, for your presentation. We welcome you back to the succeeding presentation of our Climate Action and Sustainability for Us program, or CAS for You, brought to you by the Climate Action and Sustainability Alliance and SEEK, Social Enterprise on Education and Communication. Our next presenter is part of our desire to have in our program outstanding individuals, not only locally but globally, laureates. We have already our UNEP laureate in the person of our Environment and Sustainable Development Champion in Congress, Deputy Speaker Loren Legarda, who is a UNEP, United Nations Environment Program laureate. But we hope to be able to feature outstanding Nobel laureates, if only to inspire our youth to aim to have at least one Nobel laureate soon. That's my dream for our country, because we already have one gold medalist in the Olympics. That is my town sister, Hidilyn. And now we are aiming to have at least one Nobel laureate. But our next presenter is actually part of a team, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations, that is the body within the UN system that uses science to understand climate change. And we have Dr. Let me make that bigger. Rodel Lasco, who is Executive Director of the Oscar M. Lopez Center. His work covers climate change, natural resources management, and environmental conservation. He got his Bachelor of Science, Master of Science, and doctoral degree in forestry in the Philippines, I think University of the Philippines. His work experience covers more than 40 years of experience covering as a senior scientist climate change at the World Agroforestry Center, or ICRAF, in Kenya, adjunct professor at the UP at Los Baños, member of the National Panel of Technical Experts of the Climate Change Commission, and coordinating lead author of IPCC. He pioneered research in the Philippines on climate change adaptation in the natural resources sector and the role of tropical forests in climate change, and spearheaded the Philippine subglobal component of the Global Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. He is an academician of the National Academy of Science and Technology of our country and member of the IPCC Team, which is a 2007 co-winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Together with, I think that was the time that they had co-winner with Al Gore. He's a multi-awarded scientist with over 80 technical publications in national and international journals. Friends, Dr. Rodel Lasco.
Warm greetings to all of you. Today, I'd like to talk to you about enhancing climate resilience of our country through natural ecosystems. One of the most important reasons for this topic is because the Philippines is one of the most at-risk countries in the world when it comes to climate. As you can see here, for the last 20 years, or in the last 20 years, the Philippines is number 4 in terms of climate risk index. So we are in the top 5, sometimes top 3, even number 1 when it comes to climate risk and hazards. And part of the reason for this is the many typhoons that our country gets every year. 20 typhoons a year, half of those, about 10, will hit land every year. Now, not only the current risk due to typhoons, ENCA events, but moving forward, we have to contend with climate change, the warming of our planet. And scientists have been warning about this, and policymakers globally are concerned that our climate is changing at a rate that will affect our lifestyle, even our lives as we face a warming planet. And the reason for this is known to practically all of you. Our generation or emissions of greenhouse gases, principally coming from fossil fuel burning, is causing the warming of our planet. Right now, our atmosphere has more than 400 parts per million of CO2, much higher than the Industrial Revolution period, when it was only less than 300 parts per million. And this is increasing every year. And as a result, our planet is warming. Now, one of the most exciting recent developments is what is known as NBS, or nature-based solutions. Scientists have been pointing out that we need to rely on our natural ecosystems for solutions to climate change, as well as many other global environmental challenges. For example, here's one report from the Global Commission on Adaptation showing how nature-based solutions can address environmental problems. Starting on the left, we have there for mountains, forests, and watersheds, and the hazard is landslide, for example, and the solution would be to protect and restore forests to stabilize soils and slow water runoff. In rivers and wetlands, the hazard, for example, is intermittent river flow. And again, the solution would be forests and watersheds, protecting them, managing them well, so that there is stable water supply. In the middle there is farmland, and part of the risk is crop failures, and one of the solutions there is agroforestry. In cities, the hazard is heat stress, for example, or as a result of heat islands. And one of the solutions would be more green spaces, of course, with trees. And in our coastal zones, part of the problem is storm surges, inundation, and again, one of the potential solutions would be to restore and protect our mangrove forests. So the point here is that in any part of this transect or landscape, in order to build resilience in these landscapes, nature and natural ecosystems have an important role to play. Now, our own Biodiversity Management Bureau, BMB, has estimated in one of the studies they commissioned that the value or the services provided by our biodiversity, our ecosystems, and the biodiversity in them is worth 2.3 trillion pesos. And you will note that a lot of this, aside from agriculture, would be carbon offset or more of climate protection through carbon sequestration. And there's a lot more, but climate risk or regulation is one of the important roles of our ecosystems. And the reason for this is that our forests store vast amounts of carbon in their biomass. And so when we cut trees, especially when we burn them, we release carbon to the atmosphere. But when we plant trees and care for them, maintain them, let them grow, they sequester and store carbon in their biomass, lessening the CO2 in the atmosphere. In fact, in the last official inventory submitted by our government to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, as you can see here, the year was 2000, and there our forest, the land use change and forest, this is our forest lands, you can see they have negative emissions. In short, they are actually absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, whereas energy, agriculture, and others emit carbon to the atmosphere. So again, the point is that our forest ecosystems are substantial sinks of carbon. And we have actually, or we can also actually point out to the role of trees and forests in enhancing the resilience of our smallholder farmers to climate risks. As for example, through crop and income diversification, the more trees and woody perennials in the farming systems, then the more crops and income sources our farmers would have. There's also soil and water conservation because of the protective role of trees, and even a more efficient nutrient cycling and conservation. So trees and forests increase the resilience of smallholders living around or in these areas. On our economy, forest also helps or help provide water supply, stable water supply for domestic needs, for irrigation, industry, as well as for power. We did a study with the DNR looking at the 10 priority programs, and one of their priority programs is forest protection, enhancing the national greening program, biodiversity conservation. And our findings show that these forests, in terms of adaptation, they, as we have pointed out, they lead to more stable water flows, provision of goods and services, protection of biodiversity, increased income and livelihoods. And in terms of mitigation, carbon stocks conservation, increasing sequestration, as well as reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We also look at the coastal and marine ecosystems program of the DENR, and a part of this is, for example, protecting mangroves. And these programs also have adaptation and mitigation benefits, similar to terrestrial forests, providing goods and services, biodiversity protection, income and livelihood, especially for small fishers. And on the mitigation side, they are also substantial stores or stocks of or sinks of carbon, and so help in mitigation. The World Bank commissioned a study on Philippine mangroves, and one of the findings of that study is that if we lose all our mangroves forest, I think there's about 100,000 hectares of them, and if we lose all of those, about a quarter more people will be flooded annually. In other words, more than 600,000 more people will experience flooding if we lose all the mangroves that we still have. Not a lot, but we still have 100,000 hectares or so. Damages to property would increase by 28%, almost 30%, to more than $1 billion annually. And more than 700 kilometers of roads will be flooded if we lose these remaining mangrove forests. And the study also estimated that 1 hectare of mangrove provides up to $3,000 per year of direct flood reduction benefits. In terms of storm surges, for frequent or the lower intensity storms that are more frequent, say 1 to 10 year storm events, mangroves provide some protection or most of the protection. But even for catastrophic events, the 1 in 25 year storms, mangroves also provide up to $1.6 billion of avoided damages. So again, the conclusion of the study is that this area of mangroves, mangrove forests, help a lot in preventing flooding and preventing these damages. Now, the other thing we did was in the OML Center was right after Haiyan, we heard of reports of mangroves saving a town or saving communities. And so we were intrigued when we learned of these reports. And so we went there and actually did a study. We interviewed almost 800 households or 900 households in Leyte and in Samar, and trying to find out from them whether the mangrove forests around them help prevent damage to their property. And our findings show that this is based on the perception of the coastal dwellers, people living sort of within or around those mangrove forests. We found out that the larger the area of the forest, the mangrove forest, this is on the left panel, the larger the area of the forest, the less damage they reported. In the middle panel, the wider the width. So this is the width of the mangrove, which is very important in surge protection. The wider the width, there seems to be also less damage. And finally, on the right panel is the level of richness, the biodiversity or level of richness of species. And it seems not so significant. The trend is not that clear. So again, from this study, there seems to be a prima facie evidence that mangroves can help reduce damage to property as a result of surges. Now, one of the problems we have is we have been losing our forests steadily in the last 100 years. Now, we have to admit that right now we seem to be sort of recovering part of those forests. There seems to be a positive trend. Now, this data is only up to the last, I think, about 20 years, 1990. So this is 20 years old. And in the last 20 years, there seems to be an uptick in our forest cover. But still, we lost 50%, about half of our forest in the last 100 years. Now, in response, the DNR has been implementing for the last 10 or so years this enhanced national greening program with the attempt to restore the forests that we have lost. And the private sector is also getting involved more and more. Here's an example by the Energy Development Corporation, the program called Binhi, which has already planted almost 10,000 hectares of forest, mostly with native trees in the Philippines. And now, looking at the wider picture, why should we be concerned? Now, with the pandemic, COVID-19, we have to realize that all of these are interconnected. You will see here in this chart that habitat destruction, biodiversity loss, and now climate change, coupled with globalization, has led to increasing occurrence of epidemics, even pandemics, as we are experiencing right now. And this is one of the reasons why we should care about our natural ecosystems. And so let me end by just leaving you with these messages. First of all, natural ecosystems are critical in enhancing the climate resilience of our people. And proper accounting of their services is critical in highlighting their significance. There are now more and more efforts to quantify the value of the services that our ecosystems provide. And this can only highlight the critical role they play in our society. And therefore, we must support all the efforts to conserve and manage wisely our natural resources. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lasco, for your presentation. We now welcome you back to the Climate Action and Sustainability for Us program for our last presenter for this episode. Again, this is brought to you by our Climate Action and Sustainability Alliance and our social enterprise on education and communication. Okay, let me share with you this beautiful image taken by my buddy in photography and old friend, Joey De Leon. You can see here two young girls looking at the ocean. We are surrounded by water bodies. About 4/5 of our territories are made of water. And so it's nice that some of our kids, including one organization, Kamada, Kabataang Makadagat, and these two young ladies, I hope will be representative of the interests of our youth to understand our water bodies, particularly our oceans, and what we have under them that constitute the wealth of our country, the natural capital that I think is most important because we have most of them. Okay, so what do we have? Well, our next speaker will bring us to an expedition to the deepest part of the Philippines and the third deepest part on Earth. We have Dr. Deo Onda, Associate Professor of the Marine Science Institute at the University of the Philippines. He is the second human being and the first Filipino to reach the Emden Deep in the Philippine Trench, the third deepest spot on Earth. Okay, what does it take to have such kind of experience? What education? Well, see, Dr. Onda got his PhD in microbial oceanography from the Université Laval, Quebec City in Quebec, Canada in 2017. His Master of Science in Marine Science, focusing on marine biotechnology from the Marine Science Institute of the University of the Philippines in Diliman in 2011, and his Bachelor of Science in Biology, focusing on marine microbial ecology from the University of the Philippines in Baguio in 2008. His work experience includes being a postdoctoral fellow at the Alfred Wegener Institute. I hope I'm pronouncing all of this correctly, from the Helmholtz Center for Polar and Marine Research in Bremerhaven, Germany. He was also a research fellow in the Canada Excellence Research Chair on remote sensing of Canada's Arctic frontier. In Takovic Joint International Laboratory, Université Laval, Quebec City, Canada. He was an expedition scientist of the Joint Ocean Ice Studies of the Beaufort Gary Exploration Project of the Institute of Ocean Sciences, Canada, and Woods Shoal Oceanographic Institute of the Canada Basin Arctic Ocean on board CGGS Louis Saint Laurent, and Senior Research Associate of various programs at the Marine Science Institute in UP Diliman. In addition to being Associate Professor, his other position in UPMSI is as Deputy Director for Research. Now, we are pleased to go down to the Emden Deep with you through the video taken by Dr. Onda when he went there last March. Take it away.
Of the Emden Deep. So the title of my presentation is actually Into the Unknown, diving into the Emden Deep. At the end of this presentation, I would like you to appreciate that the story of the Emden Deep is actually beyond me. Most of the stories that you see were highlighting the Filipino who actually went down. But from this presentation, I'd like you to remember what the Emden Deep is and how it is connected to us, even though it is 10,000 meters away from us. So I'd like to start with this quote. And because it's Manamo, I'd like you to remember that we know more about the surface of the moon and Mars than we do know about the deep seafloor or the deep ocean, despite the fact that we have yet to extract a gram of food, a breath of oxygen, or a drop of water from those bodies. And in reality, and until now, there were more people who actually had been to the space or were able to visit space, outer space, or had been to the cosmos than those who were able to visit the deepest parts of the biggest ecosystem on Earth, which is the oceans. So that tells us that there's a lot more to know about the oceans. But the deep sea explorations have been compared a lot with the early history of flights on space because of the immense pressure and the technological advancement that you need in order to reach the bottom of the oceans. There had been a slow progress on the attempts to actually visit the deepest trenches in the world, including the Emden Deep. The first recorded attempt to actually look at the deepest part of the ocean was when Magellan tried to measure the full ocean depth of the Pacific Ocean. But of course, he did not succeed in 1521. The next milestone was in the 1930s when the first deepest crewed descent, meaning a persons within a submersible was able to actually go down to a depth of around 435 meters on board the Bathysphere, the first submersible that time. The second milestone in deep sea exploration was in 1960 when Picard and Don Walsh was able to reach 10,730 meters and discovered the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, which is actually the deepest trench in the world, via the submersible Trist. In 2012, James Cameron tried descending to the Marianas Trench alone. And in 2019, the new record was set by Victor Vescovo via the DSV limiting factor by reaching around the depth of 10,900. And he is also the only person that was able to actually visit the deepest trenches in the 5 continents of the world. And in 2021, a record was set because for the first time, the third deepest trench was visited by humans. So the Emden Deep is just in our backyard. So the map that you're seeing on the right, just to give you an idea where it is, it's actually off Siargao. It's in the northern part of the Philippine Trench. It was called Endem because it was first discovered by the German research vessel Endem in 1927, thus the name Emden Deep. But it was further explored in 1951 to 1952 by the Danish researchers on board the ship Galathea. That's why the Emden Deep is also sometimes called the Galathea Deep or the Philippine Deep. And it isn't from that expedition that they were able to get biological samples from the bottom of the trench and a deep sea anemone, which they called the Galathian tenum. But it was only in 2021, and for the longest time, no one actually attempted to visit the Emden Deep. It was only in 2021 that the first crew descent was actually successfully carried out. So my story of being able to visit the Emden Deep started with an invitation. One day I just received an email from the Caledon Oceanic and Victor Viscovo. I was asking them how the process was, but they were not telling me how they selected me. They were just saying that there were a couple of names that they needed to pick from. And luckily or fortunately, I was chosen to actually represent the Filipinos in that expedition. He's a visionary American explorer. He has been setting records. He has summited the 7 peaks of the world and visited the deepest trenches. And he was the main sponsor of the expedition. He was also the man behind the technology that allowed him to actually go repeatedly dive in the deepest trenches of the world. If you're going to look back into history, most of the submersibles that were used to actually go to Mariana Trench or in the other trenches of the world, they were only able to use it once and never again. But the DSV limiting factor or the deep submersible vessel limiting factor is the first IMO certified submersible that can actually travel full ocean depth repeatedly, meaning go to the surface and then can just go back to the deepest part of the ocean again. And one of the key features of that is because the ball inside where the cabin or where the passengers are hosted is actually made up of 90 millimeters of titanium with an almost perfect spherical shape that allowed it to actually become habitable even after crossing 10,000 meters below the sea. So this is the inside of the submersible. This is where the two passengers are seated beside each other, and this is actually very small. The DSV limiting factor has a support vessel where it is docked called the DSSV pressure drop or the Deep Sea Submersible Support Vessel Pressure Drop. So this is the submersible you're seeing on the water, and then this is the support vessel. The form here is the winch here is the one that is being used to launch or take the submersible up and down. Caledon Oceanic has been setting records all over the world. They visited the deepest trenches in the 5 continents. They visited the first and the second. And I think it was just really on the line that they visit the 3rd deepest trench in the world, which is the Emden Deep. And luckily, fortunately, I was selected and invited to actually go with them. So each of the expedition has its own badge. So this is the badge for the Philippine Trench Expedition. So it was in March 2021 that we were able to sail off the port of Guam and proceed to the Philippine Trench. The entire planning took around a year, and the pandemic actually halted it. Around December, we already called it off. But around January, we started negotiating and then communicating again. And finally, the travel expedition was finalized and carried out in March 2021. I would also like to emphasize that I was not the only Filipino on board. Half of the crew were actually Filipinos. I felt at home. It is also to emphasize the importance and the contributions of Filipino seafarers all over the world. Remember that we did this in the midst of the pandemic. Amidst the pandemic, Filipino crew are actually running this vessel. So big hats off to these guys. So in March 23, we started the descent around 6:30 in the morning. It took around 4 hours to go down. Slowly, light was dissipating, temperature was decreasing, and you can feel the pressure actually increasing. And then you were saying goodbye to the surface of the world. So this was the actual launch of the submersible where we were housed. Sorry, I'm just gonna rewind that. if you are able to notice, there were only two windows, no? One for the passenger and one for the pilot, for the main pilot. And everything felt surreal. It felt like you're out of this world. It felt like going to another world, actually. This is the actual video from the inside the submersible when we landed, or when we reached the bottom of the Philippine Trench. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what the surface would look like. But when we reached the bottom was actually very smooth. There's a lot of sediments. There's a lot of murkiness because of the falling sediments from the surface and accumulating at the bottom. And when we disturbed it kind of just floated around. Once we reached the bottom of the trench, we had 4 hours to actually explore. So we landed at the center of the Emden Deep, in the center of the Philippine Trench, and then we decided to actually explore the western wall, which is going to the side of the main Philippines, of the archipelago of the Philippines. And this is what we saw: a lot of this deep sea anemone. These are the true forming sea anemone called Galathean tenum. These were the same anemone that were retrieved by Galathea expedition in the 1950s. And it is the first time, to see them actually living there in their own habitat. Another thing that we saw is that there's a lot of critters called amphipods. Amphipods are like cockroaches of the sea. They scavenge any debris that would fall from the surface to the bottom. So what we did was to put a bait, a mackerel, and they were feasting on the mackerel. So imagine if you dive there, and then this is what will happen to you when you reach the bottom of the Philippine Trench. A feast of amphipods will welcome you. We also saw this very deep sea jellyfish, which is now the deepest recorded jellyfish in history. But aside from that, aside from signs of life, it just showed us that the deep sea, even though it's 10 meters below the sea, it's actually not lifeless. There's an entire ecosystem that is working down there. The thing is that aside from these living organisms, we also saw a lot of marine debris, plastics. This white material here, it was a funny story because I thought it was a jellyfish, and then I was asking Victor to go in that direction to check it out. But as we approached the material, it became apparent that it was actually a plastic debris. I've mistaken a plastic debris as a jellyfish. And that was the first time I saw plastics down there. And then every 5 minutes, I was encountering more and more marine debris as we approached the western wall, telling us that it was not us who actually first conquered the Emden Deep. It is the imprints of human contamination which had been there long ago, a long way before us. You'll see a lot of different plastics. You'll see entire plastic bags, packaging of chips. I've seen a shirt, a pair of pants, a teddy bear. Victor saw the teddy bear too. So it just tells us that there is a strong connectivity on the actions that we have on land and the different parts of the marine ecosystem. That whatever we do on land will always have an impact and effect in another part of the environment. And for example, here it's the Emden Deep. Imagine 10,000 meters below, you see a lot of plastics. The entire expedition itself was not classified. It was classified as a non-MSR. It was not designed to be a marine scientific research activity, but rather just an exploration and record setting. Nevertheless, it was able to achieve several objectives. One is to increase the awareness of the Filipinos of their maritime domains. Also emphasize the importance of science and contributions of scientists to development and national progress. And also it provided a sense of pride and belongingness by appreciating more a previously unknown marine heritage, which is actually the Emden Deep. When we talk about explorations and expeditions, I've been leading expeditions to the West Philippine Sea. My colleagues have been going to the Benham Rice, to the Sulu Sea, to the Mindanao Sea, but it's very It is very rare that we actually talk about another heritage going down, which is actually the Philippine Trench and the Emden Deep. It also highlighted environmental issues such as plastics pollution by visualizing the extent and the gravity of the problem. So as we celebrate the Manamo, so happy Manamo to everyone, we should be reminded not only of the rich biodiversity and marine resources we have, but also the responsibility that we have to take care to sustainably use, manage, and protect these resources. The issue of plastics is not only present in the Emden Deep. In expeditions that we had in the West Philippine Sea, we've seen accumulation of plastic debris all over the Kalayaan Island Group, which are actually mostly inhabited islands in the South China Sea and in the West Philippine Sea. In researches that we've done, in studies that we've done, sponsored and funded by the DOST, we've seen that plastics is actually all over the place. It's everywhere. In the coast of Palawan, you will see the varying abundances and types of plastics present on the coast. And if you're gonna look at what type of plastics would you actually find in the coast, number one are still the thin plastic wraps, product labels, and packaging. 2, foamed and styro fragments. And 3, strings, ropes, and 4, ghost nets and fishing lines. So all of this debris are also affecting the different biota in the marine environment, including the mammals that will be discussed later. But the more important question now is, so after the Emden Deep expedition, is that the end for us Filipinos to explore the deep sea environments of the Philippines? For us to move forward in this research discipline, we need to acknowledge the challenges and the limitations. One is that the Philippine marine scientific research community is very much limited with capacity for ocean research. We only have one marine vessel. We only have one research vessel, which is also limited in the coastal or seasonal open ocean expeditions. Most of the vessels present in the agencies are for multiple use and not dedicated for research. There's also need for capacity building and infrastructure. So just to share to you, because it's Manamo, I want you to appreciate that we're trying our best to actually upgrade our capacity, infrastructure, and assets to do marine scientific research in the Philippines. So there's this big program called Upgrade CIA that is funded by the national government that aims, 1, to actually come up with a research station in Pag-asa, which we will be calling the Pag-asa Island Research Station, or peers. And 2, to establish the National Academic Research Fleet and long-term sustainability development and foreign MSR in the Philippines. And 3rd, to actually continue local MSRs with local collaborators. And 4th, upgrade the capacity of HEIs and SUCs all over the country to increase or to amplify manpower to do marine scientific research. Just to share you a bit on the project that I'm handling, which is on the National Academic Research Fleet. Right now, we only have one research vessel that is dedicated for academic use. But we are now in the process of procuring 4 more research vessels. 4 more, imagine that. So these vessels will be assigned in the different maritime regions of the country. 1 in the Northeast Philippines, 2 in the West Philippine Sea, 1 in the Sulu Sea, and 1 in the Visayan Sea. So researchers can go out there and explore the oceans at the same time. And that is already a big leap to what we have right now. And it is not just, a few years program. It is actually a long-term development program. We have a long-term sustainability program for this that would that we are envisioning to stay until 2035. And from there, we build more of the National Academic Research Fleet. We're also launching the National Academic Research Fleet website soon. So I hope that you also become interested with that and visit that website. I'd like to also highlight that when we talk about the marine environment, we do not only need marine scientists. We need different expertise actually working in the maritime and marine environment, maritime regions and marine environment. We need more geologists. We need more educators and researchers, chemists and biotech experts, oceanographers, maritime experts, law experts on the seas, maritime marine engineers, managers and policymakers and all of that. Gearing towards we have now entered the ocean science decade. And I hope in the next decade, all of us listening here right now will contribute to the development, sustainable development, protection and preservation of the marine resources that we have. We are actually in a sea of opportunities right now. So with this, I would like to thank again just a shout out to the Department of Foreign Affairs, especially the Maritime and Ocean Affairs Division, with us ASEC Gorbailen, Director Atienza, also to Dr. J. Batong Bakal, Mr. Chris Madrigal, and the U.S. Embassy, who actually helped us finalize the plans for the Emden Deep expedition. So with that, again, happy Manamo to everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Onda. We welcome you back to our program, Climate Action and Sustainability for Us, or CAS for You, brought to you by our Climate Action and Sustainability Alliance and the Social Enterprise on Education and Communication. Okay, we have lots of work to do after listening to these important presentations. But your homework from us is first, let us think of a program, project, or activity on climate change or sustainable development for students in your local communities, for our corporations in the areas where you work in, the areas that you cover. If you have many branches, then maybe you can initiate something in those localities that are the environments where you work in. And initiate some measures, document best practices on climate action and sustainability, and send us a note through our email address, casalliance218@gmail.com. So we would like to acknowledge the help of a lot of people who enabled us to do this second episode, a labor of love for us, our presenters and authors of our electronic book on ENCA, Ecosystem and Natural Resource, Natural Capital Accounting. NEDA Undersecretary Dr. Mercedita Sombilla, DNR Director, and former Undersecretary also, Attorney Maria Paz Ipat Luna, OML, Oscar M. Lopez, Executive Director, Dr. Rodel Lasco, the Marine Science Institute, UP Associate Professor, Dr. Deo Onda. We thank again the photographers who have been with us for several years now, except for one, no, the last one. But Joey De Leon, he is really my buddy in photography. We have been together in exhibitions, in contests. Thank you very much, Joey, for sharing with us photos. That's me, the second one, because I also provided some of my own photos. Josephine Turalba, we use again your photo. And Mr. Ralph Schlegel of ANS Plus, thank you very much for your beautiful coral reef. We hope that we can have some photos from Dr. Onda and some members of our faculty in the UP Marine Science Institute, because I know that they have been taking photos of what we have under our water bodies. For maps, graphics, and video, again, Dr. Laura David's team, Dr. Borja Villanoy and Alino for the map, showing the risks from climate change, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals figure to the UN, Shell Philippines for allowing us to borrow without your knowledge your original stool with 3 legs, but we have made it 4 now. The Department of Foreign Affairs, Maritime, let me see, what is MOAO? Maritime and Ocean Affairs Office, maybe something like that. Director Francis Herrera, who provided the video that Dr. Onda made for his expedition, because it was presented by a webinar hosted by DFA MOAO. And thank you very much to our pianist, music producer, Reynal Jerome Pineda. So henceforth, we will have music to make our presentation more exciting. Thank you very much, Reynald. And to all of you, we thank you very much for being with us for this second episode. Please subscribe to this channel, Climate Action and Sustainability for Us, or CAS for You, which what's our succeeding episodes on ecosystem and natural capital accounting, the subject of the PENCAS bill that we urge you to ask your representatives in Congress and our senators to support its early passage as a law. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.